You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. A couple of reminders before we get started with this week's episode featuring another Green Beret. Excited for you guys to hear this one as well. Want to remind you guys to please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, on iTunes. We have such a large community. In fact, I was going over the numbers for the podcast with our producer, Matt. We are so happy that this thing has grown into such a large audience. But for whatever reason, the algorithm that Apple uses to sort of promote the podcast is based off of ratings and reviews. So if you get a chance, please leave us a rating or a review. And in fact, not only do it on Apple, but do it anywhere you get your podcast. Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Leave us a rating and a review so this way more and more people can continue to hear the stories of these great Americans who have sacrificed so much for us. So again, rating and a review. Please follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. Keep up with the show and everything that we have going on. As well, it's a great place for you guys to give us some feedback on what you like and what you don't like. And then finally, a reminder about our promotion with Amazon. As we told you last week, we made another donation. How it works, you go to our website, hazardground.com, click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. It'll take you right to Amazon. You can do all your normal Amazon shopping. And oh, by the way, same thing works on your cell phone / smartphone. If you go to hazardground.com and you click on the Amazon button, it'll take you right to the Amazon app on your smartphone or on your tablet. So easy and convenient for you there as well. But do all your normal shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and we donate it right back to some of the charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. So you guys keep up the great work. We love hearing from you guys. We certainly love the fact that you're part of this community. And now let's get on to this week's episode. Joining us this week on the Hazard Ground Podcast is a Sergeant Major currently serving with 10 Special Forces Group at Fort Carson, Colorado. He's got over 27 years of experience in the military. He has been on over 7 different deployments across the globe, including Iraq and Africa. He is Sergeant Major Gary Garza joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Sergeant Major Gary, welcome. Good to talk to you.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
All right. We were just talking before we started recording that you and I almost crossed paths in Iraq in 05 and 06. So it is a very, very small army, as they say. But I'm excited to hear about, your journey and how you got there. So start at the beginning for me. How and why did you get in the Army?
So back before 9/11, most people joined for college. They joined it for college money. I went to college and, focused more on having a good time than I was my studies. So, lost a scholarship and lost my seat. And they're like, well, hey, if you join the military, you can come back. You can come back to school. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do that. So I joined the military to get the college money and to get back into college and finish my degree. And here I am 27 years later. I never left. So
what appealed to you about the ROTC thing? I'm curious because most people enlist and then go to officer. So why did you start down that road? Was it just for college?
Honestly, when I just didn't have a plan. When I got out of high school, I caught a ride with my buddy to college for orientation. And when we were there, they were like, hey, have you applied for housing? You should have applied for housing 6 months ago. And I'm like, I haven't done that. I'm like, well, if you applied for this, you should have had funding. I haven't done any of that. So I didn't have anywhere to live on campus. Well, the ROTC, and this was Texas A&M, so they have the Corps Cadets, which is a huge ROTC program.
Right, yeah.
He was standing there, and he's like, hey, you're guaranteed housing if you join the Corps. And I was like, done. I'll do that. So I just kind of fell into it, and, I was good at it, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the camaraderie. I enjoyed the discipline, and, it was difficult, but I really liked it, and I was doing well other than academically. So but that was a really good lesson for me because it paid off. It paid off down the road.
All right. So you end up enlisting, going infantry, right? How does the next step to get to Special Forces come about?
So for me, I was in the 101st, and I just kept looking for those challenges. I was looking for something. I needed something more. I went to, all the basic schools, air assault school there with the 101st, and I was honor graduate. I went to Ranger school and I came out, I graduated straight through. I went to sniper school, came out top honor graduate from there as well. So I needed more of a challenge. And 5th group was right there on the base, on the post. So we were dealing with them a lot. And I was like, I think I want to try this. So I think it was 99, 2000. I went to selection and got picked up. And I was like, okay, this is the next step.
It's interesting because I was on active duty at the same time. And I always had remarked, and I say I had the fortunate pleasure of deploying with the SF and sort of seeing that world from the outside looking in. I didn't know about it when I was on active duty. Like, it wasn't something that was advertised the way it is now. It's not sort of, for lack of a better term, glorified the way it is now. Did you just stumble upon it because you were looking for challenges, or was SF something that was like readily, made available to guys at your position at that point in time?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So, I was running a sniper section there for the 101st. So we were coming across 5th group a lot on the same ranges. They were doing their sniper SOTIC type training, and then, I was too. So I was getting to know them. And then, the infantry is, at least especially back then, is primarily where they were recruiting from. Mm-hmm. Now we're now it's much more diverse, but so we would constantly get some recruiters coming down to the infantry, and it wasn't very far for them. We were just down the road. So it seemed like a good challenge, and I wanted something more. I knew nothing about it, but I couldn't stay where I was at. And during that time, it was peacetime as well. So, I just needed something to do.
Makes sense. And you found it, obviously. So how much did you actually know about what you were getting into? I mean, a lot of guys we've talked to who have gone down that road do a lot of homework ahead of time, do a lot of studying so they know what they're getting into. Were you one of those types, or did you just jump into the deep end and see what happened?
Yeah, no, I just jumped in. Obviously, the phrase Green Beret and Special Forces, you've heard a lot about it through history. There's been movies made, John Wayne and Rambo. So I had those ideas in my mind of it's something, I felt like it was that next step. It was that next challenge and something more. So that's what I wanted. And of course, at this time, I was still under the original joining of, well, I'm just going to finish this out and then go back to college, collect my money, go back to college. So I was just looking for something while I was in to keep me going.
Along those lines, a lot of guys who go down that road are going there because they know it's their first shot at combat, right? Like it's the call up to the major leagues, if you will. Was that something that was also in your mind?
Not really, because there wasn't a lot going on.
Right. Well, that was my next question.
Yeah. In my mind, I'm sure they were doing something. I didn't know what, because like you said, it was fairly close hold, and it still is for the most part. Most people see the combat aspect of it because it's all over the news, but 90% of what, SOF and SF do is prevent war, so that's, so for me, I didn't really see it as a combat, I just saw it as a challenge, hoping that I could find something more, and then make an impact somewhere else, other than peacetime. Back in the 101st, you're armor-alling tires and spray painting rims every Friday or every Monday.
Yeah, making sure the rocks are all in order at the company headquarters. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Interesting.
So
stuff.
that was the appeal for me, but and it's funny because you asked that, because I get asked that a lot. Like, hey, tell me about the who's the bravest person or the most courageous person and of course with my, for as long as I've been in, they expect me to throw out some massive war story, and I'm like, look, man, that kid that joined after 9/11, I joined for college money. These guys, this generation joined knowing they were going to war. Mm-hmm. That they knew that when they signed up. And then you have the truck driver that's going down Route Irish, like this heavily IED'd road. They know that there's IEDs there just to bring logistics from A to B, and then they do it again and they do it again.
Yep.
I mean, to me, that takes a very unique and special kind of person. That's a lot of courage there, to drive those roads just to bring logistics.
Yeah. There's two things there. I tell this story all the time on the podcast. Like, I was the same thing. Like, I signed up, I did start at ROTC in college, and it was pre 9/11, and I remember going through my I graduated in 99, and I remember going through my senior year, and the job fairs were coming around, and my friends were like, well, are you going to the job fair? And I'm like, no. And they're like, why? I'm like, because I got to go in the Army right after graduation. And they're like, why don't you get a real job? Right? Like, because that was the mentality back then. There was nothing going on,
Yeah.
and it's funny because, you fast forward, and I end up deployed in Iraq, and I'm attached to this unit where I had no business being, right? Like, I joke around and I say, you could have laid out all the assignments for a mid-grade captain in Iraq and said, Mark, pick one. I couldn't have found a better one. I just got really, really lucky and really blessed. But
Nice.
I was one of those guys who probably logged about 5,000 or 6,000 miles on the streets of Iraq over the course of 12 plus months, running around with my hair on fire, and I had no business doing it. Like, I saw more combat experience than 75% of the infantry at that time because they were guarding gates and prisons. Like, that was their whole mission at that point in time. I mean, I would talk to infantry guys, and they were like, "Dude, can we switch?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no, I'll stay where I am, thanks. I don't want your job." So for all that stuff that came with it, all the danger and everything else, it was a different world, and I'm so thankful and so grateful for that experience because it's still to this day, I'm in 21 plus years, but to this day, it's still the best experience of my career was that deployment, but hands down. I mean, I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about just in general, the kind of level of service, that I wanted to provide to the country. And it was really one of those crystallizing, galvanizing moments, not for me personally, but also from a career standpoint. So
Right.
We digress. All right. So you go through assessment and selection. How hard was it for you?
So that goes back to that lesson I learned in college. High school was pretty easy for me. And, it's kind of like the football star in high school. He goes to college and now everybody on the team's a star, So for me, high school was pretty easy. I got to college and I thought that I could just skate through like I did in high school. And it was significantly more challenging. So I didn't have study skills. I didn't have the discipline to be able to do well. So when I got, I served some time in the infantry, and when I got to the Q course, I had those skills already. I was mature enough to be able to handle that type of work. I knew how to develop, study skills that worked for me. So, did I find it challenging? Absolutely. But, I did the medical course, which is very academically challenging.
Yeah.
And I did well. I did well because I had developed habits and discipline to be able to do well. So, I enjoyed the challenge. I loved it. And, and I found this it was like an opportunity for me to academically basically redeem myself in my own mind of, I know I can do this. I was just lazy before and didn't, so.
For somebody who wasn't a good student, why did you choose the most study intensive MOS within Special Forces?
They chose it for me.
Oh,
honestly.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah. So you take your academic tests. They test you when you're there, and then they based off of those numbers. They're just saying, okay, this guy's going to go medic. This guy's going to go, commo, and you give them your choices. But I enjoyed medicine. That was kind of my goal as I was going into college, is doing that type of work. So I thought, I have the infantry skills. I'd been to Ranger School. So I had a lot of that tactical skill already, and I wanted to kind of round myself out as far as skill wise. So, I chose, that was my first choice, and that's the one they gave me. So it worked out well for me.
You said you wanted a challenge. You certainly got one. All right. So then on to the Q course, all said and done, this is what, a 2.5 year process for you?
Yeah. For a medic, it's about 2 years.
Okay. So you get assigned to 10th group. What happens next? And oh, by the way, this is in 2000, right? So where were you on 9/11?
So I was finishing the academic portion of the medical course. And, the director of the school comes in and he stops the class and he turns on, he routes the TV into our screen where we're doing our PowerPoint presentations. And he tells us a plane just flew into one of the World Trade Center towers. So we're all sitting there in class, and then other classrooms that didn't have TVs trickled in, and we watched the second plane hit. So we had students on the ground there, the Pentagon, we had students on the ground there in New York that were helping. And, we were just finishing. So I had a couple more gates that I had to pass through before I got into the fight. But at that point, you have that flash of, okay, well, I joined for college money and I wanted a challenge. Things are going to change now. It's definitely different.
Mm-hmm.
So, you had that sobering moment where, okay, you kind of be careful when people say, be careful what you ask for. And here it was. But, it wasn't a feeling of regret. It was a feeling of, like you said, it was rewarding. This is why I'm here. This is why I went through this journey to get here. Why, and it almost, I don't want to say it justifies, not finishing college, or it justifies, the timing that I had for deciding to go to special forces. But in your mind, it kind of makes like, hey, it's all brought me here to this moment.
Sure. Yeah, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I say it repeatedly. The Army and the military in general have a funny way of putting you where you're supposed to be. It just sort of works out that way. It's not serendipity. All right. So when you get to 10th Group, what month, year are we in, and what are they telling you at that point in time? Because, the Special Forces community got in the hopper very quickly.
Right. So when, 5th Group was already in Afghanistan.
Yep.
I finished, I had to do language and SEER. So by the time I get to group, we had just invaded Iraq.
Okay.
And so most of the group is gone when I show up.
By the way, going through all that school while you see Afghanistan kick off and Iraq kick off, are you chomping at the bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And especially knowing that you just want to get there, because you know that as soon as you're done, you're on a plane. You know that you're going to be in the fight. And, people always, a lot of times people used to complain about, we have all this training and we never use it. We have all this knowledge and equipment and we never use it. So you're ready. You're like, I'm highly trained, I'm the tip of the spear. You're thinking all these things coming out of the course, not realizing that when you get to your team, the education just begins, Right. So when I showed up to group, it was, they were just starting to trickle back from the initial invasion
of Iraq. And,
right. Yep. So I went to 2nd Battalion and just kind of linked up with my team who had just come back, and then just started to integrate, started to learn how things really get done, and, some initial lessons learned. And then we just waited for our next turn. In the meantime, we did a couple other trips, Mediterranean, Mideast type area, nothing combat related or like direct combat related. And then that was just in the meantime. That was my first trip with SF, which, I don't think I put it into the bio, but, and then 2004, we knew we were set up. So we started our training and we were out the door. And it was just back and forth from there.
Quick question for you. And for those who are not familiar with how the special operations community works, or at least special forces work, each group is assigned to a specific area of operations in the world. So, for example, 5th Group, works in the Middle East. That is their main area of operations. 10th Group, however, works a lot in Europe. And so when you guys had to find out that you were going to the Middle East and you were working in a different environment, I mean, obviously it's not like you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. But how much did things change for you guys in preparing for that sort of thing?
It was pretty different. Me showing up, I knew nothing other than,
right.
I'd never had any European experience. 9/11 was again during the course. So when I showed up, it was combat. And, but for some of the legacy guys, some of the older guys, it was definitely a shift in mentality. It was we think this is the equipment that we're going to need. You have a lot of this training, but it's never actually been utilized until now. So now you're vetting techniques that potentially came out of Vietnam or Gulf War. Okay, does this work? What does, what doesn't? What equipment is out there now that we need for a change in mission to direct combat? So it was definitely a shift. And, but it was a good balance between the fresh mind coming in, looking at it new, and the more experienced guys on the team of what they'd seen in other areas of operation. So it was a good balance.
All right. By the way, just a personal note, I always said the one SF school that I wanted to go to that I would never be able to go to otherwise was SEER school. Did you enjoy that?
Not while you're in it. No, you get out of it thinking, this was probably one of the best schools I've ever went to. Once it's over, while you're there,
everybody I talked to that's what they said. Like I remember hearing stories of stuff that guys went through from SEER school. And for those who are civilians listening, it's survive, evade, resist, and escape. Correct? That's what SERE SEER stands for. So it's basically what to do if you're ever captured kind of deal. And I just the tenor of the course sounded so interesting to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a good course, and you learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah,
really. It's kind of like that Ranger School where, like that next step from Ranger School where you learn a lot of good tactics and fundamentals, but mostly you learn a lot about yourself and what your limits are and what you're capable of.
It's funny because I'll never forget, and I wish I could remember his name, but if I saw his face, I could pick him out in a lineup. When I had gotten to Iraq, one of the sergeants on the ODA that was there, you kind of get your pre-briefings that are sort of watered down and everything else when you're stateside, and then when you get them again in Kuwait. And then when you get to the unit, they kind of give you the real lowdown of where you are and what's going on. And I'll never forget the E7, when they went into the whole what to do if captured part of the brief, we were going with the rules of engagement and everything else. And I'll never forget, part of the course was what to do if captured. And he got up there and he said, all right, here's the rule about being captured. Don't. And that was the end of the brief. That was the end of the brief. And he looked at it and said, I'll be damned if my wife has to see my bleeping head getting cut off on CNN. He's like, I'll let them kill me before that ever happens. So as far as being captured, don't. And then I remember hearing about SEER school after the fact. And I'm like, that's why he said that. Got it. Noted. Okay. So it all sort of came together for me.
Well, SEER is one of those schools also that also was catching up. We were used to the World War II, Vietnam, Bosnia type generation where they would capture you and hold you. And hold you for long periods of time. Now, was that pleasant? No, but the enemy we were fighting at that time, or we still are, doesn't hold people for long, typically doesn't hold you for long periods of time. They use you as a leverage point. And then when that usefulness is gone, or it comes down to some type of extreme act to really reach your usefulness to them, then that's what they'll do. So it was a hard shift for the SEER school as well, saying, okay, this is a completely different enemy with a completely different mindset.
All right. So when do you hit your first combat deployment, in Iraq? What were you told and what was the mission?
We were, what was it? I think it was something or like degrade the enemy's capability. Some kind of, official sounding.
Sure.
But ultimately, you're there to rid the country of, at that time, they were just starting to realize it was an insurgency.
Right. I was going to say in 2004, I mean, for the history, Baghdad falls pretty quickly, right, in 2003. And, for the period after that, when you get to May, June, after the whole, quote, mission accomplished, from that part of 2003 into 2004, things are relatively quiet because we didn't know what we were supposed to do next, right? Like we didn't have an idea of if we were going to leave, if we were going to stay, what the plan was. And so you get there in 2004, and really that's the beginning of the sort of insurgency.
Right. And it was also around the time of the first free elections.
Uh-huh.
So, we were on the ground for that. So that at least gave us something on the ground to say, okay, we need stability in the region that we're at, to ensure that we can have the free elections go off without a glitch.
Right.
And so that was kind of our focus at the time is, all right, hey, anybody who's showing who's we've been told at least, or is showing the propensity to disrupt, then we're going to start to intervene in a lot of these early and try to set the stage for those elections.
As far as the actual combat portion of things, when you get there in 2004, what was it like? What was the op tempo like?
It was still pretty high. Honestly, there wasn't a trip from my perspective or my experiences that didn't have a high op tempo. that was very much what we wanted to do. We wanted to keep pressure on there as much as we can constantly. And, we would execute a target, once a week, probably on average. And, once we got our feet underneath us, and we would rotate back and forth with fifth group. And, once you get your feet on you, typically fifth group or the outgoing unit will say, hey, here's a couple targets that we've been working. These are executable now. These are ready to go. And then, you start building your own and you start prioritizing and going out. Okay, what's going to have the biggest effect? Is there timing, based off this target and that target? So it was still pretty high. And, the direct combat as far as like resistance wasn't necessarily there. It was more that insurgency style grenades and roadside bombs and, mortars and rockets from the distance, which is mostly what we were encountering.
So as this deployment continues, I mean, you're getting your first taste of actual combat. What were you thinking and feeling? I mean, did it kind of live up to your expectations in your mind?
It did. Mostly because we were just given a great deal of autonomy. And, all of us join for a sense of service. Nobody, I don't know anybody that's like, oh, I'm going to join this for the money. It's because it's not really there. There's better ways to make have a lucrative career. Most people that join have some type of sense of service or they need a purpose. And that was kind of where I was going when I joined, is I needed more, a more sense of purpose. I felt like I was capable of more. And now we're in a situation where, you're affecting the free elections of a sovereign nation. And we were given that autonomy to decide which direction do we want this to go? How do we want to influence those things? And you're sitting there with a very small team and they're asking you, this is your first deployment, but it's also probably their first deployment to a combat zone. The senior guys may have had other deployments under their belt, but nothing like this. So we had good conversations and everybody's opinion really mattered. And usually came up with decisions as a team. And, knowing that you're having that type of influence on history was a pretty good feeling.
As far as, the combat operations, were your guys affected by any of it? I mean, you guys sustained any casualties as you went through that first round?
No, the team didn't. Now we were assigned or attached. Our house was attached to another smaller fob, and they had some casualties. And we had to pull them out a couple times. We had a mass casualty with our partner force, where they were coming back from leave, and the bus was hit by a VBID right at the traffic circle by our house. So
I know that traffic circle you're talking about at Fob
yeah.
Justice. Yeah, that was a complete shit show. That traffic circle. It was always chaos. Getting in and out of that thing was always like scary because you were stuck there in a static spot that just it was such a mess.
Yep. So the medical officer that was attached to the fob, I didn't realize this until after all this happened, was a pediatrician, and he was not ready for that type of mass casualty.
Oh, wow.
So I heard it go off. I went up to the roof. I saw it. And then I saw the trucks coming in with you just had bodies in the back of these trucks and they're bringing them into the fob. And so I grabbed my bag. I believe it wasn't a PJ. We had a TAC-P with us, an Air Force controller. He was up already. I'm like, come with me. And we got on the ATVs. We drove back to the fob, and they just started coming in. Probably, I think it was like 40 plus casualties. And you're just triaging. And the pediatrician was a bit stressed out.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, just calm down. This is what we're going to do. It was kind of neat to see that, our training was very specific for this and how it can take over. And we saved a bunch of lives. The Air Force guy learned a ton. And then one of the families of the guys we saved brought me a goat later on as a thank you. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, cool. We kept the goat there at the house. It was kind of nice.
And the pediatrician remembered why he went into pediatrics.
Right. Exactly. You know, he wasn't prepared. And when I talk to people about fear, or stress, I'm like, training, that's why we train. The fear is normal. Stress is normal. What we train to overcome those things. And once you take that step and you have that familiarity with the training environment, like, okay, I've seen this in a training environment, things slow down and it takes over. And, the fear and stress starts to subside and you focus.
Yeah, I mean, that was literally what I was going to ask you next, because you go through such rigorous training, right? And again, you guys through your Q course as a medic, as an SF medic, you got a euthanized animal you're trying to keep alive for 18 hours, and you're authorized to perform surgery. But when it actually is for real, for you, it was just training kicking in. There was no pausing, no thinking, anything like that.
No,
That's
it was
awesome.
That was our first big casualty. We had some smaller casualties here and there. Some of them were just recovery operations, and you're not only dealing with so the recovery operation specifically, it was it was really dusty, and they had those those huge canals that they used to have there that would run water from up in Samara and all that. They had a dam down there,
mm-hmm.
and the infantry unit was on a patrol, and they came up to the canal. The lead vehicle turned. The two vehicles behind him got caught in the dust and drove into the canal. So we had to go there and help them with the recovery. So we had to, and they were on the ground probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I mean, they had just gotten there, and we were toward the end of ours, and they were just kind of like, they didn't know what to do. And we're like, look, you've been trained, set up a perimeter. We need security. What do we see right now? What's going on? Which way is the current going? How can we conduct a rescue operation with what we have? So, and then you had the command leadership that was there, and they were pretty broken up. These were their guys. They were responsible for them. And, that's where you're trying to focus them of like, hey, I got it. This is tragic, but right now your guys need you to take charge of this security. Let us manage this for now. Trying to give them purpose and help them focus, because they were just silent and stoic and just standing there, and their guys needed them. So, yeah, it was definitely some, you learn a lot about other people. You learn a ton about yourself. I mean, I learned in my trips a lot about myself, and, but you also start to see the difference between, the training that we've received versus sometimes trainings that others have received.
Right. Your next two deployments in 06 and 07 are both back to Iraq. Now, I speak about these specifically just because the intensity and the violence had picked up so much to that point. As I talked about, I was there for the first half of 06, and this is what precipitated the surge coming in 07, because the violence was at unmanageable points. So, how much different were those two deployments from your first one?
Well, the biggest difference is, like you said, what was the goal? So when we were there the first time, it was stability operations,
mm-hmm.
prepping for elections. And then the next two trips were very offensive. There was a lot of uprising that, the insurgency had grown really big and gotten very violent. And there was other countries at play, so we knew we were tracking all of this too. So now it became this huge chess game of how are we going to counter not just the insurgency on the ground, but the countries that are supporting them, from abroad. And how do we make these links and all these ties to let, the, State Department and the Pentagon make more strategic decisions and give them the information that they need. And to get that information, it was heavy combat operations, going out and getting it, So definitely, there was definitely an uptick in the op tempo. I would say it doubled for those last two trips. And then, like you mentioned earlier, we were also at that point paired with the ISOF, who, was a really highly trained unit.
Yep.
As far as Iraqis go, and you could accomplish a lot more. So. Yeah, those two trips were definitely, especially the last one Baghdad was pretty busy, but Basra at that height of the surge, it was a powder keg when we first got in there. Everything seemed like it was calm, and then it just erupted, and we knew it was coming.
Do you think all your training prepared you for the offensive portion of things from the standpoint of, staring down, your rifle and your scope and putting a round on target is one thing in training. It's completely different when there's another person on the other end of that. So for you, what was that experience like?
Personally, I didn't have any hesitations or issues. You can definitely feel your adrenaline, and you for a long time, this actually bothered me. Like, it bothered me that it didn't bother me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm starting to hear a lot more guys say this, people talk about, all the problems that they bring home, and the baggage, and I call it residue, the residue that we bring home. And for me, the challenging part was the fact that it didn't bother me, and that it's not that I enjoyed it. And, you look at that sociopath scale, where you have the criminal sociopath, and then you have someone at the opposite end of the spectrum that won't be able to do the things that we're asked to do. So I think we do a really good job of selecting those individuals early and saying we need someone with this type of balance that when put in these situations won't hesitate and will do the things that we need to do. And then now the next step is, how do you pick up the pieces? How do you clear away the residue, without breaking the system?
Right. And that's something personally that I always, it's not struggled with, but somebody who's sort of contemplative and introspective like me, I remember the first time that experience, I went through it, and there was what didn't feel like anything more than half a second, but there was a half a second sort of moment where in my head, before I pulled the trigger, I realized this time it's different, right? Because
True.
I'd done it on a range for my entire career, right, and everything else. But, and then thinking about it afterwards, I realized I'll never be the same person again. I remember that moment like it was yesterday, and I could still see the silhouette that I was of the person that I was staring at. But you just realize that you're never the same. And the person I was before is literally dead, and that I'll never be that person again, because that moment sort of changes you, whether you'd like to acknowledge it or not. And as you talked about, how long it takes people to work through that residue, sometimes has different effects on everybody.
No, absolutely. And again, it depends on the person, and this, just as well. As a whole is going to change you. Every
Mm-hmm.
aspect of it in a different way is going to change you. I'm a different person. I don't feel like I've gotten away from the core person that I was.
Right.
I think it's just shifted. And, for me, and I joke around sometimes about, what about the positive benefits of combat? And, people are like, what are you talking about? For me, I had a routine, and I don't know if you did, but I had a routine that was important to me. So, we have a mission to go out, assuming it wasn't time sensitive. I would lay out my equipment. I'd go through my weapon, make sure it's clean, make sure it's oiled, make sure all the parts look like they're working well. I'd unload and reload my ammo. I'd set up my kit. I'd check my uniform, and then once I got all that, I'd go out. We check the radios. If I'm the gunner, I'm checking the gun. You had a routine. And then probably an hour or so before you rolled out the gate, I would sit on the roof of the gun truck, feet on the hood. I had an iPod or whatever crappy little music thing
Mm-hmm.
that they had back then at the top from the Haji Marts. And I would make a list. It's like, okay, if I don't come back, what would I do different in my life? How would I change? Is the man I think I am matching my actions? And I would do this every time. And I had a list. I would, learn to play an instrument. I would, travel more, spend more time with family. And I had a list that was just constantly evolving every time I went out the door. And then when I'd come home, I'd start checking off that list. Okay, I'm going to travel. I've never, I had friends that weren't from the United States that had seen more things in the States than I had, and I'd lived here my whole life. So, I started doing that. I started prioritizing family. At that time I was single. So, spent time with my dad and spent time with family members and showed them the importance of that for me. And I just kept going down that list, and I felt like it was helping me clear away the residue and become a better person at the same time. And then you go back and you do it again, and you come back and you start checking off the list. Now there was some other stuff in there too, with that high op tempo where you're going back and forth so much, you're going to see those effects. You can't just bring guys out of a combat zone like that and then throw them into downtown. It just doesn't work. You're going to start to see the problems, whereas World War II, they're coming back on a ship. They got a month at least with like-minded individuals coming back from, a war zone, and they can talk it through, and they're starting to decompress and talk with like-minded individuals who have seen similar type stuff. Our generation didn't have that.
Right.
You're getting off the plane and you're doing soccer the next day, and I think that's part of some of the struggles and challenges that guys have. And I say guys general, guys and girls, that, coming back is that abruptness of it. And especially in our world where they're like, well, you've been selected and trained and you should be some of the most resilient people that the country has to offer. Well, we are, but, I live in Colorado. I have huge, granite stones in my yard, and as those fill with water and the winter comes, it starts to crack. Then the next year it cracks more and more. Eventually that stone is going to fracture. If you don't repair it, you don't do something with it. You don't fix it, wipe it away and maintain, and that's the way I see us as a whole is, I think Time Magazine said, they had a cover a long time ago, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. Well, we're impressive, the American military as a whole, especially modern day, but you don't take care of it, you're going to start to see those fractures, and we are seeing it. I'm sure you hear about it all the time.
Yeah, and the challenge is that you look at a force now that over 50% of the active force has yet to be deployed. Like there was a rush there where if you weren't wearing a combat patch, you were looked at sideways. Not because you were a coward or anything, just like how did you not have this happen yet? Because it's happened to all of us, if not at least once, multiple times. And now you're looking at a force that has turned over so much in a relatively short amount of time that, the lack of combat experience now is starting to become more of an issue for the service than it ever was in the last 20 years. And the reason why there's been so much turnover is because guys are just basically realizing that they've hit their limit, their brain is not in a good spot. Their mind is not in a good spot to be able to do their jobs. And thankfully, we are in a place where, at least in the military, we're starting, and I just say we're starting because I do not want to make it seem like to anybody listening that the military still doesn't have a mental health stigma, because we do, right? The minute you go see the psych, it's probably meaning the end of your career. And there's a lot of guys, there's a lot of guys, me included, who aren't willing to run the risk. Now I'll do it on my own personal time. I'll go to a private civilian doctor, but I would never go to a military doctor and say, and a lot of the people who, have the military insurance who are on active duty and using that, well, they know if they go use that insurance, it's going to get back. Right. Or, they're just, so we're not at the point yet. Like, I think generally in society, we're starting to talk about mental health more and allowing it to be a free flowing conversation without stigma. But the military still has, I think, more hurdles to clear when it comes to that it shouldn't be the end of your career, or it shouldn't be we don't know if this person can really do the job to the level that we need them to at this point in time. And some of that, Gary, it's more internally challenged than externally, right? Because think about guys on your team, right? There's a guy on your team who's going to go, listen, I don't have a problem going to talk to somebody, but when the bullets are flying, I don't know where their head is, and that's a concern for me. Do I have to change the way I'm going to fight because I don't know if this person is going to do the job that they're trained to do because mentally they're not in a good spot? We put more stigma on it internally, I think, than externally.
Absolutely. So this is something we talk about a lot, and you look at the DoD or the Army, like at that, people use the analogy of the big moving ship. Like it takes a while for that change to happen. Whereas in SOF, it can happen quicker. So what we're looking at doing for us, we realize it's a culture issue, exactly like you're saying, like let's go back to the original with a pediatrician. I was talking with him one day and he's like, I'll have a line around the door of people who are pretending to be injured so they don't have to deploy. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm seeing guys limp through the team room and asking them, hey, are you all right? No, I'm good, because they're worried that they're not going to deploy. So now you throw mental health on top of that, and that's just another injury. I'm going to hide this because I don't want to seem like I'm weak. I don't want to not deploy. And, I don't want the ramifications of whether it's, hey, I'm being labeled as a mental health issue and my gun rights get taken away or something like that.
Right.
All of these things start to pile on. So we realize that it's a culture thing. And, okay, how do we change that culture? How do we shift that so that the younger guys come in, see mental, we call it, performance. We also changed how we market it, but how you see that, it's just like they're going to the gym. So when I talk to younger guys, I'm like, look, here's a couple analogies for you. In my world, hey, Team Sergeant, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to work out. I'm going to stop by the dock. I'm going to clear my head a little bit. And I'm going to go to lunch and I'll be back. Like it's just normal, like you're going to the gym, because you hit it spot on. It comes down to performance. Our minds are the greatest weapon we have. And if we don't take care of it, it's going to fail. So the other analogy I use is a weapon. I talked about my routine. I would disassemble my M4. I would clean it, wipe off, and we all do this, wipe off all the carbon, especially if you just had some type of a firefight.
Yep. When
you get back to your fob or your team house or whatever it may be, weapons maintenance. Okay. What happens if there's a part that's not working right? Either we replace it or we deadline the weapon. But we don't do that with our people. Guys are not disassembling, going in to see a doc and saying, hey, I need some weapons maintenance. Basically, I need just to talk to someone, clear it out, do a functions check, because when you need it the most, it's going to fail you if you don't take care of it. And that's what we're preaching guys now, that it's a performance thing. Hey, if you don't get it taken care of, then you're not going to deploy. Go see the doc. Hey, you're limping. If you don't get it taken care of now while we're here so that you can deploy and that you're at peak performance, you're operating at a high level. That's what we need. And when we frame it that way for guys about it's a performance thing, it's not a mental health thing, it's a performance. You want to be at peak performance by clearing away that residue and have your mind clear. Not just that, but start developing that life balance. There's other aspects in your life that are weighing on you as well. And there's only so much capacity that you're going to be able to handle. So learning to manage those. And if you're trying to manage all of these pieces, money problems, family problems, work issues, and you're doing that with a compromised system, meaning your brain's not operating properly, that's a recipe for failure. And that's where guys are struggling.
Very well said. I mean, it's, sort of encapsulates a lot of it. All right. So for you, after Iraq in 2007, you start to take on a kind of completely different deployment mission around the world, both to Europe and Africa. I know some of that stuff is, agency stuff that you can't necessarily get into, but kind of can you gloss over a little bit what the function and the mission was?
Well, so, after the surge, and the success of the surge, and, bringing in, the community watch or whatever they were calling it in their regions, of, making tribes more responsible for their own security and working with us, things really started to calm down in Iraq. So what happened was, now we say, okay, hey, things are slowing down here. At that time, Afghanistan wasn't what it is, in the past few years, which is why the fight was in Iraq at the time, because everyone came there for it. And now it was shifting. So they realigned us. They were like, hey, let's realign, and we'll pull 10th Group off of Iraq. We'll let 5th Group have that back. They shifted 3rd Group to Afghanistan, which left Africa open. So they shifted us to Africa. So now you have, a unit that, was supposed to specialize in a European theater that's been operating for 5-6 years in the CENTCOM theater, now having to learn the African theater. So, the mission was the same. It was still the global war. We still had the same goals. It just wasn't as in your face and as direct.
When you talk about it not being as direct, does that mean that there was less danger? Is that fair to say or no?
I would say that, the fear of direct action was the risk of direct action was definitely lower, but you're also now dealing with really small teams. I mean, we operate in at the most 12 men, and typically you don't have that. But a lot of these missions were, not a full team. So now you're looking at 6 guys, in a country that's in the middle of a struggle of some kind, with no FOB, no gate guards, no, air support. I mean, you're just there by yourself. So that kind of shifted the scale a little bit, where the level of stress I felt was almost higher, because you just felt so exposed out there, and it was definitely a different dynamic, but it was challenging for sure.
How do you quantify success in that manner? I mean, because sometimes things are so clandestine. It's like, okay, so in direct action, you can measure success pretty easily on any given raid or assault, right? I mean, it's kind of there in front of you for you to see. And I'm not even talking about whether you sustain casualties or not, but the mission is pretty clear. And I'm not saying your mission and these other things weren't clear, but the second and third order of effects of those results may not have been felt for a while, right? So how do you kind of measure that?
So, that really came down to senior guys educating the younger guys, and then having a broad understanding of how campaign plans are built. So what we would do is we started sitting down with our young guys and saying, okay, hey, look, from national security strategy, here's what the president's guidance is for security. And then we would trickle it down. This is, in order for this area to be stable, for economic growth, to stop the recruiting from, ISIS or Al Qaeda, they're going to those areas that are ripe for recruits. Well, if we raise the economic demographic there, then they're less likely to want to do this. But we need security first. So that's where we step in. So they really had to understand on a huge scale, strategically, why are they on the ground? They needed to know the why. Once they understood the why, they understood what their piece is in the bigger strategy, in the bigger game, then it was easier for them to say, okay, I understand the end state, and they're leaving it up to me to decide how to get there, which was, again, for me, the best part of it is they're not telling you how to get there. Hey, we need stability in this region. Go on the ground and conduct special operations was literally the mission. And they leave it up to you to make an assessment and decide, okay, what's the best way? Where are the pressure points? What needs to be added and what needs to be removed for this area to be stable, so that we can start moving toward other bigger objectives.
Now, you start to be a pretty senior guy as far as rank when you're doing this stuff. Did that limit the amount of actual work you had to do as far as your position that you held?
No.
I don't know. Let me rephrase it. I don't want to say work that you had to do. I meant the actual, conducting of missions per se.
Not really. No. Again, because we operate on such small teams, everybody has a role.
Right.
And we depend heavily on everyone. What does Belichick say? Just do your job. Everybody needs to do their job. And, we've become really good at, giving up the I for the we. And we understand that I think we as veterans and military, active duty military, truly understand what teamwork means.
No, 100%. I mean, that is it's something that we preach at the lowest levels, and it's followed all the way through. So never short on that teamwork aspect. All right. Again, I know we're glossing over some of this stuff here, which due to kind of the nature of what's going on, but I do want to kind of get to 2016 when you founded the Special Forces Foundation. Now, this is an organization that is, supposed to provide focused and relevant assistance to members of the Special Forces Regiment, Green Berets, and their families. So what was the impetus for starting it, and kind of how has it grown over the last 4 years?
So, and again, you hear these stories all the time. We're and even the SOCOM commander was talking about the fraying of the force. We were pushing so hard, we were expecting so much of our SF operators that guys that were meant to, guys that wanted to stay for 20 or more years were burning out at 10, burning out at 12. And when I say burning out, we were seeing issues with behavior. We were seeing issues with substance abuse, alcohol, mental, families, the family structure falling apart. So
was this, real quick, was this just due to the cycle of, 5 to 7 months on deployment, 3 months back, 5 to 7 months on deployment, 2 months back, go to school, whatever it may be, come back, hop on the last 3 months of another deployment, come home, 3 months rest, back on a full deployment, like that? You're saying all that is the contributing factor.
Right,
okay.
Right. And then, and we can talk about the residue. At no point do you have an opportunity or develop techniques or skills to be able to clear that away. You're just carrying it with you. You do one trip, you come back, you take leave, you're fresh off of the deployment and you're probably still carrying a lot of that with you. Then you go back into training and you're back in the mindset and you're just carrying it all forward and it starts to build up. And, there was a time when, if you haven't been divorced 3 times then you're not really an operator. And, and those days are gone. Like, the modern warrior needs that tribe. They need that family support. They need the support of the tribe, men and women that we work with. And it's important for the mental well-being and the health of all of us for us to be able to level that out, to watch out for each other. We see the signs. Usually a spouse will see it first, but, and I was talking to somebody yesterday, like we've all seen that guy that comes in on Monday and just has these outrageous stories of, I woke up on a bus and I don't know how I got there. And, we just laugh like, that guy's a partier and got it. Those are signs that there's probably something going on. And we just ignore it. We see it as just, guys being guys, soldiers being soldiers, whatever it is. And we kind of dust it off. So, I was working at a special operations command at the time. And I was responsible as the first sergeant for that type of well-being. So, when you get to those high levels, now you're seeing guys that have multiple deployments. A lot of them were probably injured. So now they need a staff position to be able to continue career. They're still value added. They just probably can't run as fast, or, they have some chronic pain. So I started developing programs and I was just looking for, I'm like, hey, there has to be a way where we can, benevolent organizations can help. And, the legal process is through the CARE Coalition, and that's what we did. CARE Coalition is a SOCOM program that allows, through them, benevolent organizations to help out active duty members. So we weren't getting a lot of the support. It seemed like there was a lot of, you look at like the Wounded Warrior type, there was a lot of organizations struggling, a lot of organizations that were just not relevant anymore, that were run by people who didn't really understand the current warfighter. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to start my own. I want to do something, even if it's on a small scale, where I can help out a family here. We can do retreats and build programs that really matter to guys and make a difference, and not just throwing money at a problem. And then we wanted an organization that understood our culture and that did it for the true reason of benevolence. So, in our bylaws, we talked about, key positions will never be paid positions. It needs to be a voluntary position, active duty or retired Green Beret. There's certain rules that we have to abide by if they're active duty, which is fine. We work around those. We work around those well within the rules of what the DoD lays out. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to help guys. We're trying to help families stay together, because that has that ripple effect throughout the entire regiment.
As you started to grow this thing, did anything change with it? I mean, and how or where do you want it to go in the coming years?
So it did change. It grew really fast, a lot faster than we expected. Our initial goal was, hey, we can do a little bit here, maybe, fund a barbecue, help a family that has an AC that went out, or, pay for lawn service for a wounded guy, all of things that we've done. And it started to resonate. It started to catch on with Green Berets. Like, we like this. We like that it's run by us and it's specifically for us, and that the money, we know the money is going back to us. It's not funding a lifestyle. It's not funding a huge, compensation package. If you look at our taxes, compensation says zero. None of us get paid. And we started making, getting huge donations. We were running events involving Green Berets in the events. They were loving it. We started voluntary programs. An example is we're finishing up a project at one of our Gold Star homes. Her husband passed last year, and the house is needing repairs. So, okay, hey, we'll come in and we'll provide material, but it needs to be Green Berets on the ground doing the work. One, you're showing this family that they're still part of this family. And two, you're giving Green Berets an opportunity to help, which is healing for them as well. So, we started coming up with some really innovative programs. We just announced a scholarship for spouses, because that's a critical part of an operator's life. If they don't realize that, and we try to stress it, like, if you don't realize that, then you're not going to be your full potential. So, we're building programs like this, and they're programs to us that actually matter and that we know they're going to make a difference. It's not like, hey, we're going to do a retreat in Vail. Who wants to go? And then, I've seen couples that are on the outs go on retreats just because they want to go to Vail. And you're like, okay, well, that did nothing for the family. It did nothing to help them heal or bring them back together or help them resolve any problems. You're just throwing money at it. And then you're spending a ton of money for like 10 families. We'd rather have a more meaningful event and cover 100 families. So we just started coming up with more creative ways. We were asking the guys directly, hey, what kind of event would you attend? What would help you more? Where do you see the gaps? And, because we're still in, or some of us recently retired, we still have those touch points within the regiment where we can get that feedback. And then we built in bylaws. So, I'm already on my way to retirement. I have 2 years that I can serve in this position post-retirement. And then I need to hand it off to another guy that's more, in my mind, more relevant. That way we maintain relevancy of what we're doing in our programs and where that money is going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. How can people donate and help out if they want?
So we have a website, specialforcesfoundation.org. We're in the process of building a new one right now, because that one is just, it served its purpose for our initial growth, but now we're getting big enough that we needed something more to give out more information about events and programs that we're running. Or you can text SFF to 91999. And, if somebody wants to earmark money specific to a Gold Star or specific to, I want this to go to wounded, we can do that. We're just here to help. We just want to stop, the fracturing that we're seeing within guys that have given a lot. And we also specifically see it, and this is a new program as well, in transition. We build a sense of identity as veterans and as Green Berets that this is who we are. And then when you take that uniform away and you take that family so to speak, away, guys have some issues, and
Mm-hmm.
they have some real problems adjusting to civilian life. And the we is not as important sometimes, depending on the company. It's more about I, and
Right.
they have some struggles. So we've developed a really good transition program, and we're making sure we're leveraging all of the programs that are already available within SOF and within the Army and within the DoD, and saying, look, we don't have to do this ourselves. There's programs that are here. We just need to tweak how we do them a little bit so that they work better for our people.
You've worn a uniform for 27 years. Any thoughts on when you're going to enter that transition program?
So I'm in it now. I will be retiring within the year, and which allows me to do stuff just like this,
Right.
And start to reach out more and tell our stories. And I know, I mean, I have a feeling you and I could sit here for hours and just talk back and forth
Oh,
about
sure.
experiences,
Yeah.
and so for me, I've been helping guys for so long with that transition that it's helped me get into the right mindset to be ready for it.
How did you know you were done?
It was COVID, honestly.
Really?
COVID hit, and we all started having to work from home for a while there when the DoD shut down. And I was home every day with my kids. I got 2 boys, 6 and 4, and my wife. And I really enjoyed it. I liked being home with them all. I liked being around them all. I'd have to sneak away and go and do my meetings and do my normal work stuff. But, I could be on a call for work, and, my boys bring me a picture that they're drawing or they drew for me. And I just really enjoyed it. And I want now to 2 things, spend more time with my family. And the second one is, make room for those young guys that are proving themselves and are ready for these positions. I don't want to be that guy that's clinging on. Like I don't have anywhere else to go or nothing else to do, and they're just holding on, and there's young guys that are ready to be there and take over because we've trained them well.
I think that's the most mature leadership attitude anybody at our level of an organization can have. I mean, I said the same thing to my superiors within, the Georgia Guard here. I said, listen, as soon as I'm done having relevance, as soon as I'm done providing a specific purpose to the organization, just tell me to go. I'll leave on my own. Like,
Right.
If that's the case, just tell me and I'll leave on my own. You don't have to try to force me out the door. Someone looks me in the eye and says, listen, you're done here. You've done everything you can do. It's time I know that there are good people underneath me. I know that there
Absolutely.
are people who have room to grow. And I'd be doing a disservice to the organization if I stay any longer than absolutely necessary for my own personal reasons. And it kind of violates everything that we were ever taught and everything that we ever try to teach anybody who is junior to us, that about putting our own needs in front of everybody else's. So I commend you for having that sort of that mentality and that attitude, and realizing that, we've done a great job at training the next generation of this force, and it's time to give them a chance to shine.
So a couple things, you bring up a really good point. I had a conversation with a Green Beret who got out, and he had a really bad transition. We helped him get sober. Luckily he held his family together, but he had a really rough go. And I had breakfast with him the other day, and he's like, I would, he was like a very cephalic, like DA, direct action type door kicking guy. That was his thing. And he was really good at it. He was known for it. So he was teaching it. So when he got out, he would call back to the unit, to the training detachment, and say, hey, I know you guys got a range coming up and you're training a unit. You always forget to do X, Y, and Z. And they're like, nope, we got it. Took care of it. Yeah, but what about this? You guys always miss this part, and make sure you're doing this. He's like, yep, we did this. This is where we're at. It's all done. And he's like, I hung up and realized that they didn't need me, that I wasn't needed anymore. And he's like, and it threw me into a really deep depression and what we call dark times. I've lost my purpose.
Yeah.
And I started laughing, and he's like, why are you laughing? I'm like, because it's a simple perspective. The story you just told me, the way I see it, is you did your job. You train the next generation to do good work and protect the nation and do the things that the nation has asked them to do while keeping them alive. You did your job. And instead of being proud and going fishing, you're taking it personal that they don't need you anymore. And he just sat there for a while and kind of thought about it. And I'm like, look, man, we're spoiled in the military. Our job and our purpose are the same thing. You're not going to find that. It's going to be really rare for you to find that anywhere else. So what you need to do is find a job that you like, that meets your financial needs of your family, and then find your purpose somewhere else. When you get out, those things may not be the same. You may find purpose somewhere else. For him, I'm like, it's who you are as a person that made you a good Green Beret. It's not the color of your hat or the tab on your shoulder that made you a great soldier. It's who you are. Those things are still there. We don't lose those things when we step out of uniform. And people don't understand or think that they don't have any value when they get out. They're like, there are companies that would bend over backwards to hire someone competent, like a veteran, who shows up on time, who understands leadership, who can follow, who's a creative and critical thinker, who, sometimes brings their own healthcare. I mean, just simple things like that is who we are. No matter what your specialty was in the military, you bring a lot of value to the outside world, and you can continue to contribute to your communities and your country, maybe just not in uniform anymore.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about that purpose thing. I always call it the void, and the void is a very dangerous place. And, I say, imagine, walking into a dark room with a door. There are no light switches, but you're trying to find one. That's the void. You're going to drive yourself crazy in that spot trying to find a purpose where there is none.
Yep.
When your military career is over, your purpose doesn't stop. Your purpose in the military stops. And so often, because a lot of these guys do it for so long, they don't know how to have a purpose in another area. And like you said, you conflate your purpose with the military's purpose, and those are two different things. And so, the last thing you want to do is go looking for a light switch in a room that doesn't have one, because all you're going to do is bump into walls in the dark and you drive yourself crazy. So, it's that purpose that we all strive to have. And again, I said this exact thing in my battalion change of command speech. I told everybody, I said, listen, you're all going to be told to take this uniform off, right? At some point in time, you're going to be told you don't have to wear this anymore. For some people, it's after 4 years. For some people, it's after 10 years. For some people, it's after 24 years. But you're going to be told you have to take this thing off. Understand what that means and understand how you're going to be different. The same way the first time you put it on, you became different, I think is really, really critical. And I look, for me, I don't know a life. I don't know an adult life without the military in it. Like, it's a little unnerving. I admit it freely. I'm kind of scared, like when I'm not going to have to put the uniform on anymore, because I don't know what it's like to be a grown adult without it. It's just always been a part of me. And so I'll enter into that void at some point, and I'll have to navigate through it.
Right. But, you, I feel like you're going to be a lot like me, where we still have, you have this podcast, I have the foundation. We still have purpose.
Sure.
And that purpose keeps me tied to Green Berets, keeps me tied to the tribe, keeps me helping, and so for me, when I look at transition, I'm like, I can still make a difference with these guys' lives. We've trained them. They're going to go and do great things. Am I going to miss deployments? Sure. Am I going to miss being in the know? Sure. But I can still help in another way, the fight, so to speak.
And the other part is that we forget there was a time in our lives when we didn't have those things, right? Like, there was a time where you weren't a Green Beret. There was a time where you weren't in the know. There was a time existed all those things, and you never missed them because you didn't have them. And you have to just kind of remember that part of your life existed before in order to sort of remember what to do when it doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Well, it's giving up the eye for the we. They need to start seeing who they are now and understand that they may have changed as a person, but more than likely it's for the better.
Right.
They've become, they may not see it, but it's for the better. And there's a lot of well-meaning civilians out there. There's a lot of well-meaning, that want to help that soldier. It's become the catchphrase of, help the troops, support the troops. But ultimately, the troops need to support the troops. We need to support ourselves. We need to take care of our own.
Well, I've said that for years. Nobody takes care of us better than we do.
No. Yeah, absolutely. Guys like you and this platform to let guys know and help them find, okay, where is that value? Where am I now that I'm no longer, in uniform? Hey, you didn't change. Those fundamentals of who you are still there. They may have shifted a little bit based off of life experience and combat, but they're still there. And there's a lot of value in that. What I tell guys when they're transitioning, I open up with exactly what you said. One, this is going to end. At some point, you're going to walk out of this uniform. It's going to end. It's inevitable. Two, you got to have a plan. So you say the light switch in the room, like they're just feeling around in the dark. I dump a puzzle on the ground, on the table, 1,000-piece puzzle. And I'm like, all right, we're going to start with putting this puzzle together. And then usually the first thing they ask for is, okay, well, where's the lid? Well, no, you don't get the lid. No, I expect you to just take this 1,000 pieces with no plan, of no idea of where you're going, and figure it out.
Right.
Like that frustration is what I feel like a lot of people see right now. And like, you gotta talk to somebody who mentors you, somebody you trust, and find that direction, find that purpose, and focus on it and work toward it every day. We're good at that. That's what we've been trained to do. So you utilize those skills to continue to better your life.
Well, Sergeant Major, again, I commend you on a very long, prosperous, and certainly, impactful career. And despite the fact that it is coming to an end, there's another chapter that you're going to start to write here in a short amount of time that may be equally as important to what you just did for the last nearly 30 years. So for that, I certainly thank you and wish you nothing but luck on your next endeavor. But it's been an amazing chatting with you. I mean, really, I think we covered a lot of great ground, and certainly there's a lot of important messages that people need to hear. And I mentioned this to you before we started recording. You said that you don't know if you had a great story to tell, but you do. I mean, and it's an important one. And somebody's going to hear these topics about transition, and someone's going to hear about how to handle this whole thing, and they're going to be impacted by it in ways that you didn't know that you had the ability to do. So again, certainly thank you for all your honesty and candor, and certainly thank you for being able to share, your story in particular.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I love what you're doing here. And if there's anything you ever need from me, or somebody reaches out and needs something, I'm always here. We like you said, we need to support each other. So that's what my mission is now.
And again, it's specialforcesfoundation.org if you guys would like to help out the Special Forces Foundation. But Sergeant Major Gary Garza, thank you so much for being part of the Hazard Ground.
All right, thank you.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.